Away from politics now to other stories. Chairman of the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, Musa Aliyu, has raised concerns over the rise in incidents of sexual harassment in primary and secondary schools across the country. Mr. Aliyu disclosed this at a one-day national stakeholders engagement on sexual harassment prevention held in Abuja. Celestina Area has more.
Conference organized by Gender Mobile Initiative in collaboration with ICPC is aimed at assuring that the model policy for tertiary institution does not end up like any other policies that suffer due to poor implementation. Chairman of the ICPC says only a consistent, persistent, focused and united campaign can ensure that challenge of sexual harassment in tertiary institution is decisively addressed.
A series of engagements with stakeholders in the basic education and tertiary education sectors to sanitize them, and the office went further to draft a model sexual harassment policy for these institutions.
Minister of State for Education, Yusuf Sununu, expressed deep concern over the alarming rise in sexual harassment cases within Nigeria's educational institutions.
The Federal Minister of Education mandated all our institutions to develop a strong policy against sexual harassment, and also has gone ahead to constitute a committee through in collaboration with the Office of the Special Assistant to Mr. President on Student Engagement.
In reaction to the high rate of sexual harassment, especially in tertiary institutions across the country, the Minister of Women Affairs, Uju Kennedy, says measures are being put in place to tackle the menace through the establishment of mobile courts for proper prosecution of perpetrators.
Agreed, whoever commits will be prosecuted, whether you're a man or you're a woman. It is not one-sided.
The collaboration between Gender Mobile and RTPC will likely translate into policies and action to combat sexual harassment.
Harassment is highly gendered and is also power-centered. And as an organization leveraging technology to advance gender equality and eliminate sexual and gender-based violence, we identified that point of convergence for Gender Mobile Initiative with extensive years of work in learning environments, to collaborate with the ICPC.
The stakeholder engagement had in attendance commissioners of education from across the 36 states of the Federation, representative of vice chancellors and other officials from tertiary institutions nationwide. Celestina Area, TVC News, Abuja.
Executive Lead, Gender Mobile, Omowumi Ogunrotimi joins me on the news for more on this. Thanks for joining us. So these issues, these issues have always been there, of students being harassed at every educational level. But we understand now that is an issue of concern, especially because, there is an increased rate of sexual harassment amongst primary and secondary school students. Why are we witnessing that level of increase?
So I would say that the high prevalence of sexual harassment is due to a plethora of factors. First, which is gender inequality, and that's an issue that we are all very familiar with. But there are other causes of the increasing prevalence or incidence of sexual harassment or sexual and gender-based violence, such as unequal power relations. We see that learning environments are spaces that are characterized by power asymmetry. And in spaces where there is significant power differentials, there is likely to be power isolation. And when there's power isolation, then, abuse of power is inevitable. Another cause of sexual harassment or sexual and gender-based violence, as the case may be, also has to do with the repressive culture of silence. This has further enabled sexual and gender-based violence to thrive in learning spaces. And we also have the increasing dearth of institutional accountability. Unfortunately, Nigerian students do not have the confidence in the capacity of the institutions to actually ensure that they activate the relevant institutional mechanisms to ensure that complaints are taken seriously and that sanctions are meted out to perpetrators, and also more importantly that people come forward as shielded from possible backlash or reprisals. So the cumulative effect or impact of these causes continue to enable sexual harassment or sexual and gender-based violence to thrive in learning spaces, in workspaces, and across communities generally in Nigeria. And just to also mention that this is not peculiar to Nigeria. It's a global phenomenon. It transcends national borders, and that is why we continually call for mutually reinforcing strategies and approaches for us to put forward a united front to address this Hydra-headed monster.
Interesting. I want to, because when you talked about the power dynamics, it does seem that everything revolves around power dynamics, especially in schools. And that means it's from the school management and teachers, down to the students. And I wanted to ask you, is it that we're not doing enough to screen the kind of teachers and managers we have in primary and secondary schools? And then in cases that have been reported, what have been the success rate in terms of prosecution?
Thank you for that question. So I would say that we're not doing enough. We know for a fact that when we prioritize issues, we will put our money where our mouth is. We have regulators in form of institutions that are supposed to regulate higher education institutions, cuts across the 3 levels of post-secondary education. We're talking about universities, colleges, and also polytechnics and monotechnics. And we have the MBTE, the NUC, the NCC to regulate these, classes of post-secondary levels of education. And in 2021, the NUC actually published a revised code of governance. It's like a guideline mandating private institutions, private education institutions now, to ensure that there is that policy in place, to ensure that people report, practices that are illegal and that they are shielded from possible reprisals. And you'd wonder if there is, no possibility of also mandating these institutions to ensure that they have these guidelines on sexual harassment. But again, it boils down to political will. So I would say we are not doing enough. We have a country today where higher education institutions are not mandated to ensure that education transmittal spaces are safe. Rather, what we see is emphasis on physical infrastructure, whereas there is a point of convergence between physical infrastructure, instructional content, and also the safety of learners and even educators themselves, because we've also seen some educators experience sexual harassment. And then the other bit around reportage. The truth is that sexual harassment continues to thrive because of the lack of accountability mechanisms. And research indicates that 70% of perpetrators are repeat offenders. So just by stopping repeat offenders, we would achieve a 59.6 prevention rate in cases of sexual assault. So, but because we are not people are not facing the wrath of the law, and there are no accountability mechanisms in place, it sends shiver down the spine of people who experience sexual harassment. So when it happens, they do not report. For cases that are reported, the question is, what are the kind of investigative practices that we have in Nigeria, especially in our higher education institutions? Are the relevant committees capacitated to ensure that their approaches, their procedures are survivor-centered, especially when you talk about, the entire process of interviewing, people come forward to report, even respondents and even bystanders who report on behalf of people who have experienced sexual harassment. So it's a whole plethora of factors, and that is why there's a lot of emphasis on ecosystem approach. No one single organization or institution of government can single-handedly address this problem. We have to come together as a collective to address the systemic issue that has lingered on for too long.
And it's a good thing that the conversation has started. It even talks about mobile courts now to try offenders. We'll see how all of this play out in terms of reducing the level of sexual harassment across, the educational institutions. Thank you so much for your time. Executive Lead, Gender Mobile, Omowumi Ogunrotimi.
Thank you.